Okay, folks, I have hit record. So welcome. Welcome to today's workshop for the All-Why Flood Risk Management General Reevaluation Study. Today we're going to focus on Makiki and Palolo. As I mentioned, we are recording today, and we will post the recording as well as the slides. The slides should already be on the website. In fact, I've checked they are. And we'll post the recording there as well, as we do for all of these meetings. We're doing things a little bit differently technologically today, as I'm sharing my screen instead of the slides, which necessitates a couple other small changes. So that's why, if you're looking at the camera, I've got a couple of screens going here. So apologies if I'm facing a different screen at some point. Yes, so the next 70 minutes, we're going to focus specifically on the sub-basins of the Makiki and Palolo streams. There we are. So as you can see here, we'll focus on the other sub-basins within the watershed in the coming weeks. Next week, we'll focus on Manoa, and then the following week, that Friday is a holiday, so we'll hold the workshop on Thursday at the same time, and that'll focus on the lower watershed, including the canal and Waikiki. So one of the reasons that we decided to do Makiki and Palolo today is that, one, they're smaller than the other two areas, and second, doing two in one day will allow us to hold the agenda open for the fourth meeting. So that'll give us some flexibility depending on the kind of questions that you guys have and the kind of discussions that we have today. So we're going to take what we discussed today, and we'll take notes on that, and that will inform the content of the following weeks, and especially the topics for discussion for the fourth week. And I also just want to remind you guys that these workshops were not in our original plan that we released in November, but we added them because there was clearly a lot of interest in having more engagement, particularly early on when your input actually matters more. So we're happy that we're able to have this. There's information that is going to be important to us as we continue our analysis. Today's agenda, very quickly, Cindy, Akpal, and Eric Merriam will present, and they will give us a summary of where we are at and the challenges and questions remaining. And then we'll have some facilitated breakout discussions. So we'd like to focus most of the day on that. As you can see, we've devoted 45 minutes to that, and then we'll just have a very, very quick wrap up. So we're not going to come back together for a large group discussion afterwards, but as I mentioned, we are going to be taking notes that are going to feed into the following weeks. And I apologize, I actually updated this. It's not the updated version that I thought. It should say Eric and Sandy as presenters, but in any case, so here are our hosts and discussants, mostly the usual suspects. We also today have Ben Reeder. Happy to have him join us to help us facilitate our breakout discussions. So I'm going to just couple quick ground rules for the presentation, and we'll get right to that because we don't have a whole lot of time. But those ground rules are, please post your comments and questions in the chat, or if you want to just hold them until we have the breakout discussions, you can do that, and keep your audio on mute during the presentations. And as always, you can send a chat or email to me if you're having any difficulties or have any questions there. And also, I guess one more thing that I did want to say towards the beginning here, and I'll try to post a link. I'll post a link for you in the chat in a second, which is we have updated our management measure tracker on the project website and we have also uploaded these slides to that website. So if you would like to go, and again, I'll post the link in a second. If you'd like to go there, you can download those and you can look at the latest tracker. Eric and Cindy will be talking about not all of the measures because we have over 200, but they'll be focusing on some of the main ones of interest today. So if there are others that are in that big list that you want to talk about, then look at that tracker, and you'll be welcome to bring those up during the discussions. Okay, so now I think Cindy, you are going to kick us off.
Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in your lunch hour here. So here is a study process and progress slide, and I know we've shown this in the past, but this just is a good slide to summarize where we're at in the study process. So up to this point, we've held the initial workshops back in November of 2021, where you all helped us to identify problems and opportunities within the watershed. And so since that time, what we've done is we've been updating our models. We've conducted a technical site visit to gather additional data, to verify existing conditions, and that'll all help to further refine the models. And we've been developing management measures in addition to the ones that this community has helped to identify. And so we've been tracking all of this in the management measure tracking spreadsheet, which we'll go over in just a couple of slides. So right now, where we are in this process, we're actually in that third arrow, the development of alternative plans. And this is where we have our list of measures, and now we're starting to screen them. And so if we go back to our public meetings back in November, this is really the area that people said that they'd like to have that opportunity to provide more input on. And so that's really what we're doing here today, is just to make sure that we have all your input into this planned development phase of the study. And so after we've screened the measures, that's when we'll go ahead and develop alternative plans and then start evaluating and comparing them. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, you've probably seen this slide, but once again, I just want to highlight where we're at in the study process. So this slide really just incorporates the study process into the overall study period. And so if you look at the small blue arrows at the top, that's the study process that I just kind of spoke about in the previous slide. And these larger blue arrows right below it, that just represents the entire study timeline. So the study process, that leads us up to the selected plan. And then after that, it's just a refinement of the plan. And so where we're at right now is where you see that double yellow arrow, and it's 4 sub-basin workshops. And so at these workshops this month, we'll be talking about management measure screening and where we're at with that screening. So then the next round of meetings will be around June or July, where we'll talk about the array of alternatives that have been put together based off of that screening. And then we anticipate a draft report being released in the September timeframe. Next slide, please. And so, as Tyson had alluded to previously, this is a summary of the management measure tracking spreadsheet, which is up on the project website. And so if you can't see in the chat or anything, the website link is www.honolulu.gov/Alawai, and it's on the resources tab. So I can put that into the chat again if you've jumped on a little bit later. But if you haven't already done so, I would highly recommend that you go to the website and check out that management measure tracking spreadsheet. And so what is presented here on this slide is just a snapshot of some of the measures that are up in that spreadsheet. And so we've got a total of 204 measures being tracked currently. And out of those measures, we've screened out about 48 of them, which Eric will go into further detail about. But what I really just wanted to highlight here is the use of this management measure tracking spreadsheet. So as we continue to update the spreadsheet, it really gives the community an opportunity to provide input in real time as it's happening within this technical planning process. So, I would highly encourage you to keep checking back for new updates, jot down your notes, submit them to us, alawai@honolulu.gov, or there's a comment form on the website, and, provide us your real-time input, as you see updates being made. Next slide, please. Oh, and now I'm going to hand it over to Eric, who'll talk about the screening process.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So just to quickly and briefly go over how we've been screening these measures to date. We've really undergone one iteration of the screening process. It is an iterative process. And so during that first iteration, which again, we have completed at this point, we really screen based off of two criteria. They're fairly high level. One is, is the measure within our study authority? And so again, we've talked a lot about, what we can and cannot do under our study authority in previous public workshops. And so that really is kind of the first question we have to answer is, can we address that issue under the authority that we have? The second is the technical feasibility. And it's important to note that this isn't just kind of some subjective decision that's made in a black box. It really comes down to, what is the data showing? What are the conditions on the ground right now? So what are the data, the existing conditions? What are engineering standards right now? And what are those engineering best practices that we have to be considering as we think about ways that we can address these problems? And so again, we really lean on existing conditions and existing engineering standards and practices to make this first highest level screening. If there's even a possibility, it moves on, right? And then we address it technically. And so those are really the two ways. And what it comes down to is, Cindy mentioned that we have 204 measures, and I have this little filter here, this picture showing there's a lot of measures out there in the world. And really what we do is we kind of compare them to our objectives. Right? If you recall, our objectives are really to reduce life risk, reduce economic damages in the watershed, and then we look at their overall effectiveness. And ultimately, it comes down to hopefully a smaller level, right? Hopefully, we won't have 204 that we're looking at throughout the entire study. We'll have a smaller number of measures that will ultimately combine into alternative plans. So that was screening iteration number 1. And so Tyson, hit next, please. Screening iteration number 2 is actually still ongoing. And so this is where we kind of take a deeper dive into each measure, and we start looking at it more analytically. And so there are 3 criteria that we're using under screening iteration number 2 so far. We're looking at the effectiveness, so the extent to which it will kind of meet our objectives of reducing life risk and economic damages. Efficiency, so we do have, based off of the previous work done in the watershed, as well as just basic standard engineering knowledge and information, we can get expected costs. Do we expect the cost to far outweigh or exceed the benefits that we might receive from that measure? And then the third is environmental considerations. There might be environmental benefits based off of some of these measures, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And there might be some environmental impacts, and so we weigh those as well. And it's important to note that this is only the second iteration, so we will continue to undergo iterations of the screening process as we go. But it's the second iteration, as I noted, it's kind of getting more into the technical weeds a little bit. And so we are using existing models, so the models that were created under the last iteration of the study. And with that, we can calculate things like volumes of water that we're going to need to address. We can calculate expected damages with the economic model that we have. We can calculate high-level costs with some of the data that we have. And we'll go into that a little bit more later with some of the detailed measures, perhaps. And so, again, we're using those data to either screen them, so that can be one outcome of the second iteration, or we can put them into what we're calling these tiering criteria. And really, the tiering criteria are a way that kind of leads us into the next iteration. So what are our priorities for modeling and analysis going into the next iteration? Tier 1 measures, and I'll show some Tier 1 measures in a little bit, are just the highest analytical priority because their results could screen out other measures. It doesn't mean that we think that they're the best measure. It doesn't mean that they're our highest priority in terms of reducing risk in the watershed. It's purely kind of what's the next analytical step that we need to take to answer the questions in the watershed. And then, then you just move on to Tier 2 and Tier 3. And so the results I'm going to show today kind of talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2, Tier 3 measures. And I just want to kind of really drive the point home that it's not a hierarchy of importance, right? It doesn't mean Tier 1 are the most important or they're going to be the most beneficial or that's what we're focusing most on. It's just purely what's our next step in terms of analyzing. And really, We wanted to show you that detail because we know that you wanted to be invested and involved in the planning process, and so you can get a sense of how we're tackling this and what our approach is. So next slide, please, Tyson. I just wanted to reiterate here with this slide that today, in today's meeting, we're talking about the Makiki and Palolo streams and valleys, and so I just highlight those here on the map. Again, understanding that we'll hit the rest of the sub-basins to Manoa and down in the lower watershed and along the canal and the subsequent meetings. So Tyson, next slide, please. So I'm going to start off today by talking about some of the non-structural, natural, and nature-based measures. And I want to highlight before we get into this that really our analysis of these measures is going to rely on the final models. So we're in the process of this week and next week actually finalizing those models. And so we haven't really been able to fully analyze some of these models, but we have been able to put them into the, given existing data and information and conditions, put them into, some of them into what we call, our tiering criteria. So we're looking here at forest first and invasive management. So we've heard a lot in previous studies that, forest management in the upper watershed and control and removal of invasive species is a high priority for the communities because that can alleviate downstream flood risk. And so because of that and because of the interest, we have identified that as a tier 1 priority, and we do have our next steps in terms of how we're going to analyze that. We just haven't been able to do that yet because our models are currently still being finalized. Decreased imperviousness, so, you could impervious pavements, rain barrels, things like that, right? Again, this has been identified as a high priority for the community, and we have a good handle on how we're going to analyze it moving forward. So it is a tier 1 measure for us. So as soon as our updated models, are online, we're going to be making these a priority for us to analyze throughout these sub-basins as well as all of the sub-basins in the watershed. And the third are non-structural measures. And so here I'm mostly talking about, things like elevating homes, flood-proofing, acquisition, relocation, those types of activities. And again, these are extremely important to consider. And so these are also a tier 1 priority for us once our final models, both our hydrologic and hydraulic models, and then the economic models are online. So it's, I apologize, and I know you're probably hopeful that we had more information on here, but I just want you to know that these are priorities for us in terms of the analyses moving forward. So Tyson, next slide, please, or just hit next. So the other two that I want to highlight here are debris management and wetlands. And so those are still what I'm saying are under consideration. And that means we're going through the second iteration. These are still being considered. We just haven't really had a chance to sink our teeth into the data that we do have and really kind of get into the next analytical steps. And so again, there are ways that we can address these within our models, and we do absolutely plan to do that. It's just we haven't quite gotten that far yet. So again, I'll say that the planning process is iterative and it takes time. And so, in subsequent meetings and on the tracker spreadsheet, I know there's a lot of interest in these. So as you check out those things, please keep an eye out for these. And then hit next, Tyson. I have one more thing here. Just basically want to say that, again, if it's under consideration, both in the presentation today and on the tracker spreadsheet, it just means that we haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot of measures to look at, a lot of things to analyze. And so we just haven't gotten there, but we will. So next slide. So for Makiki, so what I'll say now, so a lot of the natural, nature-based, and non-structural measures, again, are extremely important to us. They're extremely important to you. Again, our ability to analyze them requires the updated models, and we just, aren't 100% there yet. But what we have been able to do is utilize the existing models that were developed under the previous studies and some of the data that was developed and on the data that we have. And a lot of these have allowed us to look at some of the structural measures. So we've spent time, and because we have the data and information, to look at some structural measures in more detail as we wait for the final models to be complete. And so we're going to be talking a lot about structural measures today. And again, I don't want you to take home the message that this is what's important for us. It's just that what we've had data to look at up to this point. And so if we're in the Makiki and we're talking about structural measures, and I'm going to focus on detention and storage at first. We've looked at a lot of potential storage areas, and the Makiki District Park and Cartwright Neighborhood Park, which are kind of shown in the middle of the watershed there with the green circle and the orange circle respectively, or oval, I should say. Those are Tier 1 and Tier 3 measures respectively. So Makiki District Park does represent the largest storage area in this portion of the watershed. And it's located very close to the stream. So we can absolutely pull and divert water from the Kanaha stream into Makiki Park, Makiki District Park. And so we're looking at that. And those represent Tier 1 and Tier 3 measures. Again, because what we store, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, the more water we can store, the less water we have to deal with further downstream. And that's why that's why this is such a Tier 1 measure for us, because the amount of water that we can store really does have an effect or influence what we have to do, like how much water we have to deal with, right, that remains. And so that's why it's a Tier 1 measure. So go ahead and hit next, Tyson. So there are a number of storage areas that have been screened. So if you take a look, the Stevenson and Roosevelt School playing fields, they've been screened, as well as the Archie Baker Park, because there's a very large elevation difference between the stream and these fields, especially for the Roosevelt and Cartwright parks, that, the technical difficulties and the associated costs are kind of too much to overcome for the amount of water that we'd be able to store. Again, understanding the volumes of water that we have to store. So again, we're using data to make these decisions. Archie Baker Park is also, it's very small, it's fairly small, so the amount of water that we'd be able to store is not that great, and the elevation difference between the stream and the park itself is fairly large. The Punahou School is large storage area potential, but it's very far from the stream. We thought we might be able to route water there and be able to do that effectively and efficiently, but as the team was there in the field looking at the sites, it became aware that it was just going to be too much, and so we weren't going to be able to do that as well. And so we've screened that. And then there are two more down in the lower watershed, the Central Union Church lot and the Washington Middle School detention. Those also are pretty small and not a great storage area, and they're pretty far from the stream. So the amount of effort it was going to take to route water there, again, wasn't going to be cost effective, essentially. So those are some storage measures that we've looked at in the watershed. So go ahead and hit next, Tyson. Hit next again. It didn't go. Oh, sorry. Sorry. The Ala Moana Park is another storage area that we just haven't assessed yet. So it's unassessed or under consideration still. So that's one more as well. But go ahead, Tyson, and move on. I'm talking too much, so I'll start to go a little. Try to move forward here. So here's just some photos that we've taken while we've been out there. The top left picture shows the Archie Baker Park. It's kind of hard to see, but to the right, lower right, the picture, you can see the stream channel, and then, the park is on the upper level. And so, again, you can kind of see that elevation difference that makes it technically challenging and costly to use that area as storage. The top right is the Roosevelt High School field. And so, again, it's kind of hard to see. There's a lot of vegetation, but the field's, again, very high up. I'm standing on a bridge here, and the stream is very, very low. So, again, the elevation difference there is just a technical challenge for the team. And then finally, the lower left is the Makiki District Park, again, just kind of showing that it is a large area. And I really want to drive the point home here is that we're considering things like the Makiki District Park. We would be looking to utilize these as kind of a combined green space where we, would leave it as a park, and we would leave the fields or have whatever facilities might be there for a park, but it would also be used for detention. And so we wouldn't be losing the green space. We wouldn't be losing the capacity to be used as a park either. And so we're trying to incorporate these things together to make it less of a footprint on the landscape, utilizing resources and space where it exists. So next slide.
Eric, before I go to the next slide, so I just want to clarify. In other words, you're saying when you say storage, you're not talking about like a reservoir. You're just talking about something that temporarily will catch some of the floodwaters.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tyson, for that clarification. Yeah, we call them detention basins, but yeah, it would capture, so water would be diverted to the park only when flows were high. They exceed some level, right? And so it would be a park 99% of the time, and then just during those high flow events, it would store water, and that water would be released. And so again, the green space would be able to be utilized, kind of as it is now. It would just also be doubling as a detention facility, and it can be done in ways to where you can even, we can get into that more. So thanks for moving on. So structural measures in Makiki continued. So we talked about storing water. We're also considering maybe routing water through some strategic ways out of the Makiki stream and either into the canal or into the harbor. And so we've identified a couple of bypasses, the Piikoi bypass, the Pensacola bypass, the Kiyamoku bypass and the Young bypass. Again, these are all would use existing infrastructure, existing storm sewers and existing storm infrastructure to route water. So we'd be trying to leverage existing infrastructure to route water. The infrastructure would have to be updated, and that's okay. But we're again trying to limit the footprint on the landscape and utilize existing infrastructure when we can. These are tier 2 measures for us because again, we want to see how much water we can store and capture upstream. And then once we know that, it gives us a better handle on how much water we have to bypass and divert later. So go ahead and move on. We've also been considering the Makiki tunnel system. So again, this is very similar to the SWIFT tunnel system that was developed, by Oceanit earlier earlier phases of this study. We're looking at that proposal as well as developing our own, looking at other considerations like updating the costs of those, what real estate might need to be acquired, what are the environmental impacts, additional costs for engineering and design and those things. But again, this is a tier 3 measure for us, and so we've identified it as a priority to model moving forward. And then finally, the Makiki stream conduit, which would be just a conduit under the stream channel itself. Again, we're going to try to leverage existing infrastructure first, but we're going to model this one as well. And then, also things that we just haven't quite gotten to yet are modifying bridges. So we want to do an analysis that looks at, how every bridge looks at it, serves as a pinch point and what we might be able to do to modify those. But again, we're going to wait for the final models to be available for that. Modifying the Makiki entry angle is something that we haven't had a chance to look at yet. And then also daylighting streams. So again, I know that that's been brought up as a potential kind of environmentally friendly way to restore this area, but we just haven't gotten there yet, but we will. So next slide, please. So for the Palolo, again, we're talking about kind of storage first or detention. And again, just a reminder, as Tyson mentioned earlier, it's more of a temporary detention where you're temporarily storing water. The team went out to Palolo District Park and looked at, utilizing that for a detention basin. The park itself, the big green spaces, again, there's a big elevation difference between the stream and the park. And so it's going to be difficult or technically challenging and costly to utilize the entire park area, but there is some space that is public land right next to the park that we could utilize. And so we're going to update designs and take a look at that as well. And so that represents a tier 2 measure for us. So next, please. So there are a number of these that we've screened out to this point, and a lot of them are smaller. And so I'm just going to kind of highlight, there's 2 very far up, well, all of the ones very far up, essentially above the Palolo District Park, have been screened out again because of elevation differences and small storage opportunities. And so we've screened out a lot of those. If you move down further, we looked at what we're saying Chaminade University, but it's the high school football field. It also has a large elevation, so we've had to screen that out as well. It's going to be too costly and technically challenging to utilize that as storage. In addition to the William Jarrett Middle School and the elementary school, right? Those fields are also just too small and going to be difficult to utilize as storage. And then finally, we looked at the City Mill parking lot and the public storage parking lots further down in the watershed. And again, these are just going to be too small. Again, we had the volumes of water that we needed to kind of address, and these just aren't going to get us there. And so again, from a storage perspective, the Palolo Park is our first priority, is our tier 2 here. So move forward again. And then some others that we haven't had a chance to look at, we've talked a lot about potential for underground storage. So we're still considering those, but we haven't really been able to utilize data to look at those too heavily yet. We're also looking at permeable pavements in some of the parking lots and other areas. So again, the storage parking lot, the City Mill parking lot, and then the Mission parking lot. And so again, we have identified these areas for permeable pavements, similar to the analysis that I was talking about earlier, where we were looking at kind of decreasing impervious surfaces. It's going to be the same type of analysis. We just haven't gotten there yet to look at those more specifically. So move forward one more. And so here's just a few photos kind of showing that again. So the first photo on the left there is the Palolo Valley District Park, and you can see the stream channel and how the elevation change between the park kind of up in the upper right and the stream channel itself. But there is that kind of space right next to the channel that again is public property that we could use as storage, and so we've identified that as well. And then we called it the Chaminade University, but it's also the St. Louis High School or School Field. Again, it's kind of tough to see, but the stream elevation is much, much lower than that field. And again, the technical challenges and costs with utilizing that as storage, even underground storage, would be very, very challenging. So we screened that out as well. So last one here, I know I've been talking a lot, and I tend to do that, I apologize. So move forward, Tyson. So the last round of structural measures, again, we just talked about storage and Palolo, and now we'll talk about some of the additional. So again, I know I mentioned the SWIFT and the tunnel systems. So we're also considering, again, the Palolo for those tunnel systems as well. Again, with the considerations including costs and real estate and environmental impacts, we're taking those into consideration. And so that has been identified as a Tier 3 modeling priority for us. And then go forward one more. There are a number of measures that we haven't had a chance to look at yet. Some things like filling basins that would try to reduce velocities and increase time to the canal, increase the time from Palolo to the canal. Again, modifying bridges, I talked about that earlier. And then also channel modification, right? Could we increase the capacity of the channel by digging it deeper or making it wider? It is an urban area, so it's going to be challenging, but we haven't really gotten there. And then finally, we've talked about channel naturalization. The Palolo stream is channelized for the majority of the way, and so that does represent an opportunity as well. But again, we're going to need the final models to get there, and we're not there yet. So I think I got one more slide, and it's just a picture of the Palolo channel, and I did that just to kind of show again how naturalization, the kind of the channelized system, to allow people to kind of think about what naturalization might look like there. And so with that, I will stop talking, which is probably a welcome relief for everybody, and I'll pass it back to Tyson.
Thanks, Eric. No, it's much appreciated. Obviously, there's a lot of information that you had to convey there, so really appreciate it, man. All right, let me move on. Okay, so we're going to go into our discussion groups. We are a little behind schedule, but I think it's okay. We still have a fair amount of time. And so what I'll do is I'll see kind of how we're doing in the time that we've allotted ourselves, and if we need to go a few extra minutes, and that's fine. So here's what we're going to do. We've got we're going to have 2 discussion groups, one for each area, and in previous meetings, those of you who joined us in previous meetings when we had the breakouts, I randomly assigned you to different rooms. This time, I'm going to allow you to choose which room you want to go to. So if you're interested in the Makiki group, you can go into that. And then actually, you're welcome to switch to the other group too if you would like to do that. Ben is going to facilitate here in the main room. I think that WebEx still keeps anybody who is phone only in the main room. So if you're on phone only, you'll be with Ben here in the main room, I believe. And for those who are not phone only that are on WebEx, you will be able to choose which room you want. So let me, let's see, and also before I actually activate those. So we do have a few specific questions, somewhat specific questions, just to kick things off for you. There's already a lot of questions in the chat, so I think we're already off to a good start in the discussion. But here's some additional questions. We'd like to know if you have any additional questions about our screening process. If you have questions about any of the measures that Eric has described today, or about any of the other measures on the tracker that haven't been mentioned today, and do you think that we've captured these measures appropriately so far? And are there still any other measures that you can think about that we haven't put in the tracker yet that we need to consider for these sub-basins in particular? And finally, our technical team is interested in getting additional information about Loikalo, taro farming and the effects of that on flooding. There's obviously some information out there that it has beneficial effects on flood risk. We'd like to get some additional data about that. So yeah, Sydney, you mentioned Jeff Herzog. I was talking to him earlier today. He said he's going to send us that information. But we thought maybe some folks in the community might also have some additional information as well. So if you want to provide that to us either in the breakout or you want to send us an email, that'd be great. Now, finally, just before I activate the breakout groups, you know, our usual ground rules for the discussions. Join the group that you're most interested in, and that's a new one. But, you know, post your comments and questions in the chat. Use the raise hand tool if you want to be called on. Keep your audio on mute unless you're talking. Introduce yourself briefly the first time you speak, and of course, be conscious of acronyms and technical language. And also, you know, let's make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk. So with that, I'm going to actually go back to the questions, and I'm going to start our breakouts. Let's see. Okay. All right. Let's give it a go. I'm used to assigning people randomly. I'm not going to do that this time. Yeah, Sydney, you will be welcome to go from one to the other. I realize you can't be in two places at once, but you can, if you want, you can do part of the session in one group and part in the other group. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're going to be capturing all the discussion, and it's going to feed into the next workshops that we have. And also, you know, we'll post the recordings and the notes on the website. All right, here we go. Okay, so you should see in the participant list, there will be a little breakout session tab you can click on, and then it will list breakout session 1, breakout session 2, and then you can click join to the right of that. There we go. Great. People are going in there.
So just to clarify, 1 is Makiki and 2 is Palolo?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. 1 is Makiki and 2 is Palolo. Okay. So I'm going to go into session 1 to help facilitate that with Kelly. And Ben, I'll let you do your thing here in the main room. Appreciate it.
Sounds great. Let me know if anyone's having trouble choosing a room, or if you have no choice to be other than in the main room, that's fine as well. Happy to have you. Don't want to, you know, lose people who want to belong to either of the geographic specific breakout sessions. So I will share this. Throw the questions up here. 1 second. Great. And we have Cindy with us for now. Assuming you all would like to stay in the main room, these are the questions that we have. We have Cindy with us and others. How would you all like to start this conversation? I don't want to pick on anyone individual. I'm new to the group, so thanks for working with me, and happy to hear your questions, comments. And I see, though, that we have one gentleman that just joined the meeting. And just to catch you up where we're at, we're in breakout groups answering questions. So Mr. David, if you just joined the meeting, you should be able to look at your participants list and join a particular breakout session. We have session 1 is Makiki, session 2 is Palolo, I believe, but you should be able to freely roam. Other folks in the main room, I see there is a hand up. So Luciano, do you have a question or a comment?
I only have comments. I never have questions. Thank you. But it is good to flag the proposal in terms of study authority, yes or not. But I think it's crucial to flag these proposals in terms of if they are the kuleana of the state, the city and county, the property owner, or some other entity like a community-based organization. Because I am afraid that you would exclude, you will not consider some measures that are crucial. They are just not the kuleana of the Army Corps. Thank you.
Okay, and I'd like to see, I guess, if Jeff or Cindy have a response. I have a couple questions for you, but any response there, Jeff or Cindy, assuming you're still in the room?
Yeah, hey, Ben. Aloha, Luciano. It's always good to see you, my friend. Luciano brings up a great point because we've always discussed that this project is a large jigsaw puzzle, right? And so the course project can only be one portion of that puzzle. And so we need to identify the measures that we can fit into our project, but then we also need to identify some of the smaller pieces of the puzzle, the other pieces of the puzzle that is the kuleana, the community, or the state government, or the city and county government. Because if we don't identify who is responsible or who could implement which features, then you're always going to end up with an incomplete puzzle. So Luciano brings up a great point, and I think that we should make sure we capture that in the future discussion, especially with our partners at the city and county and the state. Over.
I would like to send you a template on how measure can be described in a way that the community can understand, and they can be detailed in terms of which stakeholder should be the primary entity to carry that out and the other that can collaborate. We have done this for the US Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service, for Waipio Valley, the flood mitigation study of the Wailoa River on the Big Island. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything to add on top of what Luciano said, and or do folks have other questions?
Well, I have another comment, if I may. This is just for the whole watershed of all the Aupuaha of Waikiki. Originally, before the canal, we had 3 watersheds, Makiki, Manoa, Palolo, with 3 streams. All the streams were going down to the ocean independently, like all the maps of Waikiki indicate. The giant engineering mistake has been to combine the streams and put them all in a Lavai Canal that has only one outlet. So the real macro solution would be that each watershed has its own independent access to the ocean, so that we don't combine the danger of flood as we have today in Alavai. Let us admit that we are dealing with a giant mistake done in the 1920s. And whatever we do is a small correction that don't deal to the real issues, that each valley should have access to the ocean with their streams and not combine it. This is the major things. Thank you.
Yes. Without, I guess if there's more comments, please go ahead. Jeff, Cindy, you might have more. I would like to hear more about your ideas there in terms of how do you ensure that each watershed has its own access to the ocean, but
just look at all the maps, then look at the modern map with all the urbanization and try to reconstruct as much as possible so that you don't have only one outlet. Otherwise, at least create more than one outlet to the ocean on the Palolo side on the Capahulo side that was originally designed and never built. So let's look at the reality of the original design. They had 3 outlets, and then they designed 2, and then they built only 1. This is the problem that has to be addressed. Thank you.
I got you. Yes. Okay. Well, other people, please chime in here. And again, if you need help getting to the other breakout rooms, that's fine. I'm kind of the room that is non-geographic specific. So
I'll weigh in if nobody else is ready to weigh in, which is to agree with Luciano and ask the question. You asked what questions do we have? Are you screening out things while you, based on objectives that you've already identified, that preclude the kind of solutions that Luciano is suggesting? In other words, if the primary objective is to avoid flooding the Aloi, then that really changes the upstream options, as opposed to if the primary objective is to avoid flooding upstream, then that's a different matter.
So Ben, I'll chime in here, and that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. And so to answer your question, our mission right now is to reduce the flood risk in the Aloi watershed, and so that's not only Waikiki, that's not only the Makali, Moiliili, Makiki neighborhoods and the Palolo and Manoa areas. It's to look at it comprehensively across the watershed to reduce those flood risks. And the unfortunate thing is it becomes an exercise of literally chasing the water down the watershed. And had we never interfered with this in the 1920s, the Hawaii, I think it was the State Department of Health, did it for health concern reasons. They drained out the wetlands. Then you would have continued to have the water evacuating through its natural reaches in the 3 different watersheds. But the issue is that between 1920s and the 1970s, they constructed several different communities. They hardened the entire area. They created these flumes in order to evacuate the water quicker. And they sent it all down into the Aloi Canal, having no real consideration for future sea level rise and climate change. But in the meantime, what's happened is off the coast of Waikiki, you've had some beautiful reef that's been flourishing because it doesn't have that brown water and the pollutants evacuating out onto it. And so what we're finding across some of the other islands, specifically in Maui, is that when you have these natural reaches and these old sediment deposits, it's actually causing issues on the reef. And so all of the things that we have to take into consideration is not only how do we reduce the flood risk, but how do we not transfer the risk and destroy the natural resources out on the reef, because the coral reef is your first line of defense against coastal storms, and we're seeing increased risk of that across the other islands. And so it's a very complex problem, and it may be a combination of different things. From you saw that Eric had mentioned some underground diversions. Clearly, we're not going to be able to create above ground releases out into the ocean anymore because we've developed too much. So we need to figure out subterraneously how can we evacuate some water out without necessarily bleaching and killing and destroying that coral that serves as our first line defense. So right now, I will tell you that nothing is really off the table, provided that it's not something that's detrimental to the environment or detrimental to the community safety. We're really taking an opportunity now that we weren't afforded from 2018 to 2021 to develop a plan that optimizes those benefits for the community. It's a long answer to a short question, I know, but it just goes to show how complex this problem really is when you're looking at the different pieces of the puzzle.
thanks for that, Jeff. Luciano, I don't know if your hand raise is a fresh hand raise or if it's lingering there, but you're always welcome to come on.
Was before, but I can add something about the screening of the measure. I hope that in addition to your framework, you screen the measure, sorting them out in terms of which are alternative to each other, which one are complementary to each other, which one create some synergism independently of who is responsible to carry them out. For example, what you are going to do does not matter what you are going to do with Alavai Canal when now the Manoa Palolo Canal is full of debris, of vegetation and so on. The channel profile is not as it was designed. That has to be clean, and if that has to be cleaned by the state, that should be done yesterday. I was yesterday looking at it. The channel is a disaster. There is vegetation, rocks, stones, and so on. So the approach to screen the criteria should be done in terms of grouping them, in terms of how they make sense or not by group, regardless if then one is feasible or not. Conclusion, don't eliminate anyone immediately. Group them first by purpose and scope. Thank you very much.
You got it. Again, I mean, the team is working on a process and they're actively displaying the screening process. So I think there will be, you know, continuing down that path. However, they do look at these sorts of synergies. I can guarantee that. And, you know, if Jeff has things to add, go right ahead. I see there are comments coming in here in the chat box. I'm having a difficult time opening and seeing it all, but Glenn, if you want to come on and discuss, if not, let me see what's going on here.
Yeah, Glenn, I see your question. It does the mitigation efforts of the streams in Alawai Canal. Oh, hold on. I just scrolled a little bit. I'm sorry. Does the mitigation efforts of the streams in Alawai Canal include mitigating stormwater drainage systems, especially unmodified drainage canals that have not been modified or privately maintained? And so what he's referring to, for anyone in the community who may not be familiar, if you go up into the Manoa Valley especially, you'll see where up by the East Manoa Bridge, up by Manoa Valley District Park, where you have a lot of stormwater channels that they were either never completed or they were designed in such a way that really never made sense. And so I think what he's getting at is part of this project to go and evaluate some of those stormwater systems that either were designed incorrectly or are no longer viable based off of the development in today's community. And so that's one of those things that goes back to what Luciano was talking about is you know, what's within the Corps' authority and what's the responsibility of the city and county. And so that's one of those things where we won't be able to go in and do anything about the stormwater drainage, but if we can identify it, then we can make those recommendations to the state and to the city and county. And then I want to talk on what Luciano just mentioned briefly about, actually, I won't, because I want to give other people an opportunity to talk. Okay, we can get back to that. It sounds good. But yeah, folks, we can monitor the chat, come off. Love to hear your voice. We have a lot of folks in the participant room here with just numbers, so we don't necessarily know who you are. But yeah. Other questions, comments? Are those measures rubbing with you? Are we missing anything?
Since the hand thing doesn't seem to have much effect, and I'm not being critical, because I know this is just doing this by webinar is a great way to do it. I'm impressed, but several of you have mentioned jurisdictional issues, whether it's Corps of Engineers, State Department of Health, Honolulu. It seems like we're able to create multi-jurisdictional kind of entities for things like football stadiums and wealthy developments in Kaka'ako. And maybe what we need to do is look at how do we put the three streams and the Alawai all under one jurisdiction, instead of trying to piece together the maintenance of one stream and the property owners over here. And this is not an engineering solution, it's a public policy idea, but I think it's something that you can just, just as you guys talk about it, the complexity is tremendous. And by adding this jurisdictional complexity makes it even more difficult. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll now shut up.
No, please. Your comments are welcomed, and I think it's a great idea. And I think it would be remiss to just recognize that this effort in and of itself is a collaboration. You're bringing people together from multi-jurisdictional boundaries, especially public, community, and whatnot. And so, as these sorts of efforts move along, the synergies are going to grow. I don't think you can have a process like this one that's been going on for so long, and if it were to get to a finishing point in terms of a feasibility study, just have people walk away. It's too much spotlight for that. And so I think this is the stepping stone personally. And I think with engagement, participation, reminders at every level that this needs to continue from all participants, that's the way to success, in my opinion. Any comments there, questions in terms of what SP?
Yeah, on this, I have a comment. I don't know who is Mr. SP, but I think it's a great idea. Even instead of detailing or fighting on measure 3, 4, 5, I think the community want to see from the government memorandum of understanding on how DLNR will collaborate with the Army Corps, how they too will collaborate with the city, with the property owner, and so have a general memorandum of understanding precisely as Mr. SP say on the policy approach. Then we will fight on the measure, the detail, the wall, the non-wall. But that is what is missing. That's why the community don't believe the bureaucracy as we have been approached, because it's not clear what will be agreed upon in general principle. I think that is the missing piece, and that's why the community is not on board yet, unfortunately. Thank you.
Yeah. And I see Glenn's question there about in-person meetings. What's the project's plan to host that in each community? Jeff, do you have those insights?
So what I'll tell you is right now, clearly the city and county of Honolulu and the state has just recently kind of pulled back some of the restrictions on in-person gatherings. I would make the recommendation that each of you reach out to your community and your neighborhood boards and request a specific meeting or presentation in front as part of your neighborhood boards that meet once a month, because our team is more than happy to go out and visit and present and discuss specific to your areas, because sometimes certain areas feel neglected because they don't have a loud enough voice, and they often get muted by other communities. So being able to attend your neighborhood boards and present, I think would be a great opportunity and a great suggestion.
See who else we have in the room here. Okay. So additional comments. Feel free to jump in and out of the various breakout rooms as you desire. It's one of the nice things of the WebEx platform, and we can help you do that. But feel free to come on and discuss here. You got Jeff live on the mic, myself, and happy to discuss. So chat away or come off mute and share your comments. Have you all used the crowdsource reporter? I was curious how that is going for you. I personally haven't taken a look at it, but I'm going to bring it up right now. And how is that working for you as a medium to express things that we're discussing in this group? Glenn, Luciano, SP, have you all taken a look at that?
So I'll weigh in just that accessing this through the web rather than through a app is a lot less capability. So like chat is invisible to me. The couple other tools you've mentioned, they may be there, but I can't see them. I'm used to using other tools, and so it's conceivable they're there. But I'm not being critical. I'm just sort of giving you a heads up of what somebody who's relatively web literate, but not to WebEx.
Yeah, and I'm talking about this tool that I'm calling up on the screen, and I'll put it in the chat box just so you all
cool.
have it. So, you know, just something to explore here. You can post comments, look at what this is my first time in it. So wanted to see if people are into this type of stuff. But don't let this online viewer distract you. If you want to talk more about measures, if you want to talk about more about things that perhaps we're not considering or understand in which way we are considering them, please don't hold back. Otherwise, I will just in the background explore some of this for your visual pleasures here. So people are adding comments here. You can see on these red dots, and you can post like this one, for example, in the blue square. Consider using community members as a workforce to maintain and clean stream beds throughout the area. Or like we discussed today, create a proactive collaborative between state, city, and other folks who have kuleanas within these areas to maintain them, in trying to maybe codify that at whatever level makes sense. Young people need work. I like that. Anyhow, just cruising around this, but other comments I can flash. These are the general questions that we're looking for. And given that we have Jeff here in presence, handle a lot in terms of knowledge of the project and where things are going. Laura, Dawn, Brandon, haven't heard from you. Many phone numbers. Invite you to come on.
Well,
What's Jeff?
If Laura's not going to volunteer, I'm going to ask her to give just a quick. She knows more about the Makiki, Makali, Moiliili community than anyone I've ever talked to. No offense, Luciano, I love you too. But if you can talk to us a little bit about, you know, your known history of the flooding in that Makiki area, because I think a lot of people don't realize, like, it's not just something that started in the 1990s and the 1960s. It's something that historically has been going on.
And she may be multitasking.
And you're on double mute, so you've got. There you go.
I'm not able to address the Makiki water flow area, but I am the Moiliili person, and the confluence of when the two streams, the Palolo and the Manoa, come together, that would be the areas that I'm most concerned about. But there's in the, if we're skipping ahead, I'm ready to wait for session 4, but there I've observed all of the different flooding areas at high, I guess, flood times or rain times that go over the fields in the Allaway Community Park areas. And there's what's really needed at the school areas in my neighborhoods are about 3-foot high berms around the schools. But the rest of the fields, I know you're going to address this later on, but the rest of the fields should be left open. And if you hold it steady, I don't know if my little arrow probably doesn't work, but I can show you all of the areas that right now, and you have a sort of a triangular threesome just Mackay of the Iolani field and track area. That triangular area, yeah, right, is all flooded, and the berm around the Allaway School will prevent that flooding. And then, of course, the community gardens would flood also. And then over here in the Allaway Community Park area, which is keep going towards the outflow. No, over here. No, back down a little bit. That also, yes, but right here, yes. If you see the little dot, I probably put that in, and around in here. All of that floods also, but it's a natural overflow, and it eventually just dissipates. The ducks come in and have fun, and then it dries up. So I wouldn't really do anything except to protect the school, that school, and Hokulani and Noelani School up the way, because all of those need protections, but they don't need very much protection at all. And so what, and I hate to jump ahead to number 4 session, but that unfortunate design of the bridge should not be a starter at all. There's a huge, I haven't finished my chat for that. There's a huge box drain that's there, which is a major outflow into the canal. And this supposed bridge is just going to jam up everything possible because of the bulwarks, but also because it's all of these off ramps have to have large ADA compliant slopes, and they'll gum up the whole area. So Meredith, Soniat, and the people and the planners, they simply will not answer our questions. They're avoiding it. They're avoiding the section 106 and 6E, the historical ones. They're avoiding everything because they want to keep the money, that's federal money, piling into their salaries. And that's unfortunate, but it's the observation of the flooding is something that's of great concern. I do believe that over here by Kaimuki High School and the golf course area, there are easy ways just to channel it into the golf course area. And of course, my idea is to lower the golf course by 3 feet, and you'll solve practically all of your distribution problems with the flooding waters. And then you have a small little pump out that takes place at a certain time. Is that enough? Did you want anything more specific? I mean, I observed the fish flop into the onto the fields when it overflows, so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jeff, are you able to comment at all in terms of the golf course participation and where they're at in the as far as measures go and where things are at currently in the evaluation? You might be muted, or yeah, let's see here. But other folks still in the room too. Richard, Mike, love to hear your voice. Anybody else on the phone? Comments? Okay, noted. We'll be saving the chat dialogue, so we'll note that for session 4. What else? Remember, you can float freely. Happy to share any other information that I may have. Laura, I'm curious, why would you not join the other geographic specific breakouts?
Just because,
Yeah.
let's see. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Just because my familiarity with my own community, my own neighborhood is far greater than the others. And the only thing I was asking is about the confluence when it comes from the Palolo and the Makiki and Manoa joined together. That's although it's a deep channel right there, because Palolo is channelized, concrete channelized. I don't know what would happen there if it just absolutely flows up and then overflows. And the other area, which is in the Kaniwai area, which is also a nice detention basin, and the to some extent the UH Lo'i is, but I would suggest that the parking structure, which was not advisedly placed and right next to the stream, just Mackay of the Lo'i, would be better to have the sides knocked out so that they're going to have flow through there if a flood overtops that part of the stream. Let's see, you have to go move your screen. Yeah, okay, keep going. No, move your screen upwards. I'm sorry, go more Mackay. Okay, whoa. Okay, so this is the confluence is there, but what you're, there's the dormitories that are there that also need probably to open up their lower stories and let the water just run through. Also.
Isn't that all right here? These are the dormitories, correct?
No, not those dormitories. There's ones that are down the stream across from Koali Road.
I got you.
There's some there. They need their lower stories just broken out, put ping pong tables in for kids, the students or whatever. But, you don't need to remove the buildings. You just need to make them easy so that the flood can go through them and not jam up everybody else that's in the community.
Gotcha.
And the Kaniwai Field is a very nice detention basin, but it needs to have the Hokulani school with a berm around it.
Right.
And the kids will enjoy the berms because they'll just run and jump over them. So I don't think they need to be more than 3 feet high, but if you recommend a little bit higher, okay. But earth berms are probably the easiest way to do it. I really don't want to see anything that's called a concrete wall around anything, if at all possible.
Yep, I believe the team has heard that.
Yeah.
Not only in this process, but and I saw Luciana, you had a chat there. Let me try and call it up here. It is hard for me to multitask with that on the WebEx platform. How is Manoa campus being better protected for the next flood? My donation of 100 maps. UH Library got washed out last time. Yep. And I was working for NOAA on a historic imagery project, and that whole collection got rocked. So yeah.
A lot of that was the debris that stopped up the narrow drainage channels. It's on the Malka side of the campus, Malka of the east-west or Miley Way. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the landscape director Roxanne Adams tried to open it up, but there was no way she could. And what happened is the water just flowed into that lower basement area in the library. So an awful lot has to do with debris management.
Hey, Laura, good to see you. I'm sorry to cut you off. Sorry to cut you off, Ben. but so I thought that was a really good discussion that we had over on the Makiki side. It looks like you guys have been having a good one here too. And I'm sure the same for Palolo. So really appreciate everyone's input. Appreciate everybody being here, you know, during your lunch hour and all that stuff. So as I mentioned before, we're going to, oops, I just did something.
No,
Sorry.
I
There we go. Okay. All right. I just clicked on something weird. Anyway, so we're going to take all the notes, you know, from those breakout discussions, and we'll put them together, and you know, it'll inform the discussions and presentations for the following weeks, and particularly again, you know, the topics that we discuss in week number 4. So thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. Actually, I guess you're right. I should share my screen so I can put up the final slide, which there we go. So it's just got the, just wanted to remind you, you know, that these are the links. We posted them in the chat earlier. So if you want to get updates, go to that website. We still have Crowdsource Reporter open, at least until the end of this month. And of course, you can always email the project team as well. So again, thanks everybody. Mahalo. Ending recording.